So one of the questions people have been asking is how to make this curve into a straight edge so you can put a panel or you don't have a seam in the middle. This is the elderberry blossoms mask pattern, the original that had come out. All you're going to really need is the pattern, a straight edge, ruler of some sort, either a marker or pen, scissors, and scrap paper. This is thick, somewhat thick material. It's not. It's like construction paper, so it's not cardstock thick, but it's thicker than printer paper. So all I did was trace out the youth large from the pattern, and then what I'm gonna do is find this, fold it in half because this pattern is symmetrical top and bottom. I can fold in half, and then I can fold it in half easily and it would match up nicely. And then from there, what you could do is line it up. If you don't have a grid to work off of, just draw yourself a straight line, either on a piece of paper and tape it down to the table, or use some sort of a guideline that you know will be straight. So using this guideline, using your straight edge line, what you can do is see how much of this curve it is already straight. Now it is a nice curve, so not much of it will already be straight. So what you can do is cut on your center line, and you want to cut as close to your edge as possible without cutting through. And this is where thicker paper would come in handy. So now, again, line that up there with your straight line. So what I'm trying to do now is line up as much of this curve as I can onto my straight line. So, so it looks like, without going over. So as you can kind of, hopefully you can see that this would be too much of a turn. You want to be as close to the line as possible without compromising your curve. So once you get that done, I guess tape would be a good thing to point out. You do need some tape. It makes it very helpful. Clear tape, Scotch tape, blue painter's tape, any tape. And it might be beneficial to have a couple of pieces already cut out, so you don't have to keep pulling them. Like, you don't want to move this as much. Try not to move this as much. I mean, it will be secure. It will be taped. So this is as close to the edge as I can without losing my curve too much. So I'm just going to tape, somewhere there. So now if I lift it, I'm not losing that angle. Alright, if you want you can tape further down, but that's probably good enough for me. So next, what I would do is see how much of so it used to be just that one point that hit that line. Now it looks like I can go as high as here. Oops. As high as that mark there. And all I'm doing is referencing this line, this dotted line in the middle, and seeing where my curve starts separating from it. So in this case, it looks like it keeps going all the way up to about this point. And it doesn't have to be completely accurate. And because I want to keep this symmetrical, I'm going to go ahead and fold it in half And using my center line, I'm going to cut up to that line. Actually, this is where your straight ruler would come in handy. So draw a line from this center, or from the mark you just made, to your center line. And that's just to minimize how much space you want. Minimize too much adjustment to this line, because you want this line, when you fold your fabric up together at the end, to be together like that again. So folding it in half, and if you wanted to see the full mask and see the flat side, how it looks when it's flat, you could, when you trace your pattern out, leave enough space for the mask on this side, so that you can just fold your fabric along this line. So like, let's say I'm making the small, it wouldn't work with this printout. You would have to trace it out onto other paper. But I would fold it right at the edge there, and then just cut from here as close to that center without cutting the center out. And all that's going to do is give you a starting point, like a starting point roughly this size. So then you would do these steps off of those points and onward as far as you want. But like you can see, doing that here won't give you enough fabric to cut the whole pattern. So you will need to trace it onto another piece of paper. So now we have this. Use our line again and just line it up as straight as you can get it. And again, it's not the most perfect. There will be room for error. So it looks like my line could go from somewhere here. Let's use a solid line, that might be easier. The dotted line is nice, but it's also giving me a lot of empty spaces. Thus the dotted line. Okay, so here the line goes and goes and goes, and then I think that's roughly where it starts separating. Now, I'm not an expert at this. I'm just kind of winging it, but in theory, this sounds like it would work. In my head, it seems like it would work. I'm just now making the pattern, so I haven't tested this ahead of time. And again, so I just made the mark as far up as possible. Oh, I forgot to tape. That would help. That would help. Before I cut the next line, make sure you tape between. I got a little ahead of myself. So somewhere around there. Oh, I'm using the... Okay. So there and there roughly. So yeah. Definitely want to tape it, because then it becomes very flimsy. So the tape is there to help give you that straight edge. And the tape is there to keep your straight line straight. So as you can, I don't know if you can see, but maybe you can't see. It is a little bit dipped here, where instead of completely straight, it's kind of curved this way. So instead of being, it's small enough that I don't think the camera is going to pick it up. But I can see that it's not perfect. But again, there is room for error in this. So when I cut this, I'm lining up this side and this side as well, because those need, in order for it to stay symmetrical, those need to be lined up. And I'm just gonna cut on the new line, and again, close to the edge, but not through. And keep repeating this until you are happy with how much flat surface there is. So like right now, if I stopped right now, well, okay, if I had stopped before I cut this, like right there, that's where we were, then my straight edge would have been about 3 inches, roughly. So if you had a panel that was maybe 2.5 inches, or had an image that was roughly 2.5 inches, this is probably enough space. But let's say you had a bigger or a taller panel or design that you wanted to fit on here, then you would want to keep going and repeat this for as many times as you want. I'm going to see how far I can go as in the curve, and then show you the next step after that. Okay, so I only did it a couple more times, and I ended up with this. So my straight edge is here. This curve should not have changed at all. This edge here, from this point to this point, and this point down here, should be the original mask as well, minus all of these little tiny points, which should be small enough. It's negligible, but this is our final pattern, and I'm tracing it onto, this is shipping paper, like Amazon shipping paper. I recommend, like, you can use a thick paper for this, construction paper, cardstock, whatever you want, even printer paper is fine. But for the pattern, once you're done with all of the dart making, or once you're done with your modification, I recommend tracing it onto thin paper, something malleable like wrapping paper, newspaper, or tissue paper. Better option would be muslin, if you had muslin, or scrap fabric or something that you're okay. If it does, going to the bin if it doesn't work out, just because the fabric will behave better, because your ultimate goal is to put this into fabric. The paper will be a little bit more finicky. So thin paper is better so that you can get your folds in nicely. Now, the next thing I did was trace all the way around. I just lined up my straight edge against the straight edge of this paper. Yeah, I could have marked it here and then done the straight edge, but I kind of trust that this is a straight edge. So I went ahead and did that. One less line to cut or trace. So this much will have to be a dart. So instead of one curve, you do split it. So you have a little curve there and a little curve here. I didn't go any further just because I didn't see the need for it. If you want, you could keep going until it is completely flat. It's just personal choice. So in my case, this would have a little bit of a dart there, a little bit of a dart here. Then I traced around all the way around. I don't need to trace this part. I just need to know where this tip is. So you can just trace all the way and just stop here, pick up here, trace, and go all the way around and down. So I did it this way so that you can see where our points are. And I'm going to try not to move this shipping paper because it is very noisy and crinkly. But I wanted to show you the next step is to take these points and just connect them. You'll have excess fabric, but for excess material there. But, well, this whole section is extra technically. but just connect that. And then take your scissors and cut on the outer side all the way around. I'll do that off screen because this paper is really noisy, and you don't need to see me cutting around the edge. Then once we cut around the edge, we're going to gather this down. Because we wanted a panel here, I would not do darts all the way to the edge. Instead, I would do tucks, and I'll show you that in the next step. But cut this out, and we'll do tucks, and I'll give you another option as well in case you don't want to do any creasing of your fabric. Okay, so I cut this out, and I went ahead and folded it into quarters. One thing I forgot to mention earlier was before cutting it out, make sure you write where your fold is so that you know where your front of your mask is. It's not identical because you can see that this is a straight edge and then it kind of like makes a corner, and this is just smooth. But it could potentially, you could potentially easily mix it up. Which side's your front and which side is the side of the pattern. So I recommend writing on fold or something on the front. I went ahead and decided, like, let's say in theory we wanted to use a 3x5 inch panel or image. So since this is one half of the mask, the other half would be here. So our image, if we wanted it centered, would be roughly in this area. So this is 5 inches and 1.5 for a 3.5, or for a 3x5 image. Just to give you an idea of placement, where it would be and how it would look after we scrunch this section. Also, make note the curve from here to the straight line still fits. You have a little bit of room if you wanted to use a slightly larger image. I wouldn't, for adult small, I wouldn't go any larger than 3x5. But again, it's all up to you. But yeah, I just made note of where the dart for the top and the bottom start and end so I can see. Then comes the tucks. If you really wanted to, you could do darts, but I think that they wouldn't. It depends on your image, but I think it would cut into your image too much. So what I did, because it's symmetrical, I just folded it in half, and then folded it again using that corner. So this straight edge stays as is, but this section from here up is what we added. It's from this tip to this tip. So I just folded that in half again, and drew the lines. You don't have to draw the lines. I just figured it's easier to see on camera. So I drew out those lines so that we can see. So we have the middle section of our mask that we started out with. I'm just going to pull that over here and just roughly gather. And this is where your thinner paper or your fabric paper or something like that would come in really handy, because it's gonna make this a little smoother of a transition. So I'm just trying to get all of those tips together into one point as accurately as possible. But again, there's wiggle room. It does not have to be perfect. That coming from a perfectionist. Alright, so then, now that I have that kind of not gathered, but tucked on top of each other, I'm gonna use my finger as my pivot point and squish this part out. So the theory is you wouldn't do anything with a fabric from here out. You would just stitch. You would put this all together and then kind of just go with your seam allowance, because your main goal is to get this section, the line from here to here, to be as close as possible to the original. So it is a little bit curved. Oh, actually I have room to grow. I could stretch it out a little more. Something like that. So that's our end product. That's what we want. And actually, I can simulate a seam by just using tape. So let's pretend we stay stitched that down, so it won't move, or it will move minimally. So that's there. So that's kind of our seam allowance. And the next thing, what you could do probably better with an iron is just iron this part out and make your creases there. And again, I personally wouldn't stitch these down, just because I would want as much of the image to be visible when the person's wearing the mask, or when the mask is constructed. But if you wanted to, you could treat these like darts and stitch that section down, and then stitch the next section down, and the next section. And you can have as many points. You don't have to have the, you don't have to fold it into quarters. You could fold it into eighths, or you can fold it as many times as you want. Which brings up my other idea. So something I would probably do is just base stitch this along the edge before you get to this point. I'm going to undo this. But before I do that, so you see some of your image will still be distorted. No matter what, it will be distorted a tad bit, because you're trying to put a flat image on a curved, a small curved section. So there will still be some image distortion. If you, what I would probably do is base stitch along this edge all the way down, and maybe do another one, and then just gather that down to size, and do again kind of like what I did to check the size. I would just gather this all the way down, and it would give you a lot, kind of like a skirt. It would give you the gather at the top, like the waistline of the skirt is scrunched up, but the bottom of the skirt is pretty much straight and smooth, and you can see the designs clearly. So this would be the pretend waist, and then this would be the hem of the skirt. So the details would be potentially a lot more visible if you do the gather as opposed to the tucks. But again, it's all up to you. It's your design. Another thing to note, like I was saying, on fold here, if you wanted to, because this design is symmetrical on top and bottom, you could just work, like if you wanted to honor the symmetry of it, you could just work with a quarter of the pattern. So instead of copying the whole thing, just copy a quarter of it, and then do this process. And then when you're done and you're happy with this, then you would put this and this on fold. So you would go something like that. Actually, maybe it won't work, because you might want to keep the center line uncut, just so that you have a point of reference. But it's just another idea if you wanted to keep it completely symmetrical. And if you decide to use a different pattern, sometimes the top is different from the bottom, like the nose piece is different than the chin piece. So just make note of where your top and bottom is, just so you can keep track of what is where. But I'm losing my train of thought. I think that was everything. Yeah, so this whole section gets scrunched up in basically disappears. So you're basically just scrunching all of this back up. Your image will still be distorted. You want to cut on the fold. So when you, after you make this pattern, the original calls for 4 mirrored image pieces, 2 for the lining, 2 for the outer. What you would do instead is use your modified front for your outer and cut 2 of those, and then cut 2 of the original. And that will just ensure that you are still the same size as you intended. It works with any of the sizes that you try. Again, your image may be limited by the amount of mask available in the front. So like for the adult small, I would not go larger than a 5-inch tall image. The width, there's still wiggle room, but again, anything that's closer to the cheek and side will be more distorted than the center. I hope this helps. Again, I'm not a professional. I was just curious and wanted to see if this is something that can be done. And in theory, it sounds like it would work. I haven't tested this on a mask yet. If I get time, if I will try and get a mock-up up. But this should, in theory, work. But yeah, if you have any questions, just let me know. Hopefully everything was visible. And good luck. Have fun creating. And stay safe. Bye.